He stepped on his hand. Not by accident. Not in a rush. Not without seeing. He looked down, saw the trembling fingers stretched across the marble floor reaching for that bottle, and he placed a full weight of his leather shoe on top of them, slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants another man to understand exactly where he stands. The lobby of Hargrove Industries was a kind of space designed to make you feel small if you didn't belong. 40-foot ceilings, polished white marble that caught every footstep and sent it echoing upward. Fresh-cut flowers at the reception desk, white lilies, replaced every Monday morning. A receptionist who smiled at anyone who looked like they had somewhere important to be. The man on the floor did not look like he had somewhere important to be. He was elderly, mid-70s, maybe older. His coat was olive gray, thick wool once, now worn thin at the elbows and collar. His shirt beneath it was white, buttoned to the top despite the coat, as if he made a quiet effort that morning that no one around him would notice or credit. His shoes were clean but old. His hands, the hands now pinned beneath a pair of $300 Oxfords, were thick-knuckled and weathered, the kind of hands that had done decades of real work and carried the record of every year of it. He had been reaching for a plastic water bottle that had rolled a few inches beyond his grasp. A small thing. The kind of thing that takes most people 2 seconds and no thought at all. For him, this morning, it had taken everything he had. Richard Holden, Chief Operating Officer, Hargrove Industries, had seen the hand, had registered the man, had taken the coat, the posture, the presence of someone who clearly did not fit the aesthetic of the lobby 30 minutes before a board meeting, and he had made a decision in the span of a single breath. He pressed his shoe down. Then he looked away. The way people look away from things they've already decided don't require their full attention. And he said it loud enough for the receptionist, for the security desk, for the 2 colleagues walking behind him, for the old man on the floor, for anyone within 30 feet to hear clearly. You're an eyesore, old man. Security! Get this garbage out of our lobby before the board meeting starts. He didn't wait for a response. He straightened his cuffs, both of them, one then the other, a practice motion, and he walked toward the elevator bank without breaking stride. The lobby went briefly, uncomfortably quiet. The man on the floor looked up. His eyes were wet, not from pain or not only from pain. The kind of wet that comes from something older and deeper than a shoe on a hand. The kind that comes from being reduced, from being looked at and found disposable, from existing in a space and being told, without any particular passion or heat, that your existence, there is a problem someone else will need to clean up. He didn't respond. He didn't defend himself. He didn't call after Richard or explain himself to the room. He simply looked up, and for just a moment, before he lowered his eyes again, there was something in his face that the security camera in the upper left corner of the lobby caught perfectly. Not defeat. Something much older than defeat, and much more patient. Subscribe to Echo Tales by Ken, because the most powerful person in any room is not always the one in the best suit. If you believe in that, hit the like button right now, and make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next in this story is something you will not want to miss, and you will not see coming. Stay with me. His name was Arthur James Hargrove, and he had chosen that coat himself 3 weeks ago, when this idea had first taken shape in his mind. He'd found it at a second-hand shop 2 neighborhoods away from his apartment. Not his real apartment, the one overlooking the park on the east side of the city, but the small place he kept under a different name for mornings like this one, when he needed to move through the world without being recognized. He had a gift for that, for becoming, in the right clothes and the right circumstances, entirely invisible to the people who should have been paying the most attention. He had arrived at the building at 6:45 in the morning. The cleaning crew was still finishing the floors. A young man mopping near the entrance had nodded at him without suspicion, just one early riser acknowledging another. Arthur had nodded back and settled himself near the main entrance, coat pulled close, and waited. He was not comfortable. His legs had been giving him trouble for the better part of a year now. Something his doctor had given a long name to and his physiotherapist had given a set of exercises for, neither of which had fully solved the problem of stairs, of long standing, of cold floors. He had taken a cab across town rather than being driven, as he usually was, because a driver would have asked questions. He had brought the water bottle himself. He'd loosened the cap just enough to make it look like the kind of thing you'd struggle to open. And then, when he'd heard the elevator doors opening and seen the lobby begin to fill, he'd let it roll. Not far, just far enough. He had been watching the building for 3 months, reading the reports, yes, the quarterly filings, the internal audits, the HR summaries that crossed his desk to the Foundation's administrative office. But reports told you what people chose to write down. They didn't tell you what happened in the lobby at 7 in the morning when no one with a title was watching. Now he knew. He picked up the bottle. His hands, which were genuinely shaking this morning, the cold, the position, the hour, closed around it and held it. He was not done watching yet. In the next 35 minutes, the lobby of Hargrove Industries filled up the way lobbies do before something important is scheduled, gradually. Then all at once, people arriving in waves with coffee cups and laptops, and the particular energy of people who believe today is a day that matters. 3 members of the Hargrove board arrived during that window. Arthur watched each of them from his position on the floor, still and quiet, a detail at the edge of the room that the morning kept moving around. The first was Gerald Marsh. Gerald was 61, a 20-year veteran of corporate board service across 4 different industries, and a man who prided himself on what he privately called situational grace, the ability to read any room and respond to it appropriately. He had given a talk on this once, at a leadership conference in a hotel ballroom, and the slides were still available on the conference website. Gerald saw Arthur from about 15 feet away. His face did something quick and complicated, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second, and then he produced a laugh. Short, reflexive, aimed at no one in particular. The kind of laugh that functions as punctuation in a moment you decided not to engage with. He angled his path slightly to the right, kept his eyes forward, and was through the elevator doors before the laugh had fully faded. The second board member was Patricia Weil. Patricia was 55, the sharpest financial mind in the room on any given day, and a woman who had spent 30 years learning to move through difficult spaces by staying in motion. She was on the phone when she came to the main entrance, already deep in a conversation about the morning agenda. She stepped around Arthur the way you step around a wet floor sign, registering the obstacle, adjusting the route, continuing the sentence without interruption. Her eyes never made contact. Her pace never changed. She was in the elevator before the doors had fully opened. The third was Douglas Crane. Douglas was 58 years old and had the particular confidence of a man who had been the smartest person in the room so many times that he had stopped checking. He noticed Arthur immediately, not because he was more perceptive than Gerald or Patricia, but because Arthur was now close enough to the main path that Douglas had to actively decide what to do about him. He decided to escalate. He walked to the reception desk, not to the security station, not quietly, but to the reception desk where the young woman on morning duty was organizing arrival sign-ins, and he placed both palms on account of the way men like Douglas do when they want you to understand that what they're about to say is not a request. "That man on the floor over there," he said, and he didn't lower his voice. "This is a liability issue. We have the full board arriving in the next 20 minutes. You cannot have this kind of situation in the lobby when this building is hosting a formal session. It looks like nobody's in charge." He straightened. "Get facilities or security. Whoever handles this, down here immediately, before anyone important sees it." The receptionist, whose name was Amara, and who had worked the morning desk for 3 years and absorbed more than she was ever credited for, nodded carefully and reached for her phone. Douglas gave the desk one more look, as if confirming that his instructions would be followed, and moved toward the elevator. Arthur watched all of this from the floor. He had a small notepad in his coat pocket. Old habit, years of it, and he had written 3 words during the past 35 minutes. Not names, not observations, just 3 words, one per person, that captured the thing he'd felt most from each encounter. He didn't write them down because he needed to remember. He wrote them down because it helped him stay calm. He was still sitting with a bottle in his lap, turning it slowly between his palms, when he heard the elevator doors open again and a different kind of footstep. Faster, lighter, the rhythm of someone who is late and knows it and is trying to make up time without running because running would be unprofessional. He didn't look up right away. The footstep slowed, then stopped. He looked up then. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed, though he'd never been reliably accurate with ages. She was wearing a navy blazer over a cream blouse, dark trousers, sensible shoes that had seen some miles. She had a laptop bag on one shoulder and a manila folder pressed against her ribs with her other arm, and her expression, when their eyes met, was the open, unguarded kind that people usually grow out of somewhere around the fourth year of working in corporate environments. She hadn't grown out of it yet. She stopped completely, set her bag down, lowered herself to one knee on the marble floor, without any performance about it, just down, deliberate, present. She took the bottle from his hands, broke the seal cleanly, handed it back, both hands, the way you hand something fragile to someone you trust to hold it. Here you go, sir. Her voice was even, unhurried, like she had nowhere to be, which he knew from the way she'd come through that door was completely untrue. Take your time. You matter. Arthur looked at her face. He had spent 35 minutes in that lobby being looked past, looked around, looked through. In the space of 12 seconds, this young woman had looked at him, simply directly, and seen a person. He took the bottle. His hands were still shaking. She stayed kneeling until she was certain he had it steady. Then she stood, picked up her bag, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the elevator with the quiet efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with its cost. She was 17 minutes late. She pressed a button. She did not look back. Arthur watched the elevator doors close. Then he looked down at the notepad in his pocket. He turned to a fresh line and wrote her name. He'd read it off her ID badge when she leaned close to handing the bottle. Sarah Okafor. He underlined it once. The 42nd floor of Hargrove Industries was a different world, where the lobby was open and cold and built to impress visitors. The executive floor was warm, close, upholstered, the kind of space that communicates, through every material choice, that the people who work here have already proven themselves and are now simply exercising what they've earned. The carpet absorbed sound. The windows ran floor to ceiling along the south wall, and the city spread out below them like a detailed model of something you might build to remind yourself how far you come. The boardroom itself was a centerpiece, a long room with a walnut table at its heart that was genuinely the most beautiful piece of furniture in the building. 22 feet of solid wood, hand-finished, built by a craftsman in Vermont from a single slab that had taken 2 years to source and 6 months to cure. It had come up in pieces in 1987 because the elevator at the time had not been wide enough to accommodate a hole. Richard Holden stood at the far end of it, jacket on, notes in hand, working through the agenda for the morning session with the focused ease of a man who had run this kind of meeting enough times to do it partly on autopilot. The separation packages are ready for signature, he said, sliding the folder toward Douglas. Legal has reviewed all 37. Severance terms are compliant. Notice periods are clean, and the press language on the restructuring has been approved by communications. He paused. I'd like to get this done in the first 20 minutes of the session before the other agenda items. So we go into the rebranding discussion without this hanging over the room. Gerald nodded, already scanning the top page. Patricia had her own copy open. The cost savings from these positions, do they appear in this quarter's projections or next? Next, Richard said, but we'll reference them in the forward guidance to soften the narrative around the rebrand spend. Douglas leaned back. What's the rebrand timeline again? 18 months for full rollout. The immediate priority is the name. We want to move away from Hargrove as the primary brand identifier. The founder-era branding is limiting our positioning with younger institutional investors. The research is in the appendix. The founder-era. No one in the room said anything about that phrase. No one shifted in their seat or cleared their throat or exchanged a glance across the table. It sat there unchallenged, the way comfortable assumptions always sit, invisible, load-bearing, unexamined. The door opened, not briskly, not dramatically. It opened the way doors open when someone on the other side has a key and knows the room and is in no particular hurry, because they understand that the room will wait for them. The man who walked in was wearing an olive gray coat, worn thin at the elbows. His shirt was buttoned to the top. He was holding a half-empty plastic water bottle in both hands, and his hands were shaking. Not from nerves. Arthur would tell you later, though he'd understand why someone might assume that. Just the cold, just the hour, just the body doing what bodies do at 74 when you've had them kneeling on marble floors, since before dawn. Richard was on his feet before Arthur had crossed the threshold. "This is a private session. How did you get past the—" "Sit down, Richard." 3 words, quiet as a hand on a shoulder. And the room, the whole room, not just Richard, responded to them the way rooms respond when something has shifted in the atmosphere, and everyone present feels it simultaneously before they understand it. Richard sat. Arthur walked the length of the table. He didn't rush. He passed Gerald, who had gone very still. He passed Patricia, who had closed her folder. He passed Douglas, who was watching him with the careful expression of a man running calculations and not liking any of the results he was getting. He reached the chair at the head of the table, the large chair, the one that had sat empty since the session began, because no one had claimed it and no one had thought to ask why it was there, and he pulled it out with one hand and settled into it. He put the water bottle on the table in front of him. The room was so quiet you could hear the city. "I built this table," Arthur said, not loudly, the way you say something true, which doesn't require volume. "Had it made in 1987. Solid walnut. Single slab. Took 2 years to source. We brought it up in pieces because the elevator wasn't wide enough." His eyes moved around the room, taking in each face in turn. "I think I'll take my seat." Gerald's pen was not moving. Patricia's phone had gone dark against the table surface. Douglas was looking at the door, then at Arthur, then at the door again. The triangulation of a man who was reviewing his options and finding the inventory smaller than he'd like. The realization moved through the room at different speeds for different people. For Patricia, it arrived as a single, clean click. She saw the coat, she saw the table, she saw the water bottle, and she understood. For Gerald, it came slower, fogged by disbelief, the way any information arrives that requires you to revise something you were certain of. For Douglas, it came last and landed hardest. For Richard, who had pressed his shoe onto a hand in the lobby 3 hours earlier and told its owner he was garbage, for Richard, it arrived like a door opening onto nothing. Arthur Hargrove, founder, majority shareholder, the man whose name was on the building, the foundation, the original articles of incorporation, every document in every folder on the table in front of them. "I've been sitting in your lobby since before 7 this morning," Arthur said. "I wanted to see what this place looked like when it believed I wasn't watching." He opened his laptop. The screen was already live, the lobby security system, pulled up through administrative access he had maintained and never disclosed to the current executive team. Full resolution, full timestamp. He pressed play and set his hands flat on the table. The footage ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Arthur did not narrate it. He did not point at the screen or editorialize or pause the playback to make a specific moment land harder. He simply let the camera show them what the camera had seen. Gerald's laugh, Patricia's detour, Douglas at the reception desk, voice raised enough that the audio track caught every word. Richard's shoe, the angle of Richard's face when he said what he said. And then, near the end, sharp and clear, a young woman in a navy blazer setting her bag on the floor, kneeling, holding a bottle out with both hands. The footage ended. Arthur closed the laptop. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the one before. Heavier, more aware of itself. "You saw a nuisance," Arthur said. "You saw garbage. You saw a liability in the lobby that needed to be handled before anyone important arrived." He paused. He let that sit. This company was built by people whose names you will never find on any of these documents. People who drove the trucks and ran the floors and stayed late when the numbers weren't working and came back the next morning anyway. People who gave this company decades and whose names are on your termination list today. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room was that quiet. He reached for the conference phone in the center of the table and pressed a button. "Sarah, could you come up to 42, please?" A pause on the line. Then her voice measured, trying to read the situation from nothing. Yes, sir. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Arthur said. "Take your time." She knocked when she arrived, which none of the board members had thought to do that morning when they'd walked in. Arthur told her to come in. She stood in the doorway with her folder still pressed against her side. She looked at the table. She looked at the 4 executives. She looked at the man at the head of the room in the worn coat, and she was still working out the geometry of it when Arthur stood. "You're not in trouble," he said. "Please come in." She walked forward slowly, stopping near the foot of the table. Her chin was up. Whatever she was feeling, she was meeting the room. Arthur stood at the head of it and told her what he had seen. Not the footage. He didn't need the footage for this part. He told her what it had meant on a cold marble floor at 7 in the morning. To have one person stop. To have someone set down what they were carrying. To be handed something and told, without any performance or obligation, that you mattered. He picked up the first envelope. "This is a mentorship contract. Direct access, my office, my schedule, my network for the next 2 years. Every door I can open, we open together." He held up the second. "And this is a full scholarship in your name to the Hargrove Foundation. Whatever path you want to continue, you continue it." Sarah's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together hard and nodded once, because she could not trust her voice with anything more than that. Arthur looked at her steadily. "You saw a human being this morning," he said. "That is not a small thing. In this room, in this industry, in the world we have all built together, that is not a small thing at all." He held her gaze. "You are the future of this company. And I mean that in the most literal way I am capable of meaning anything." They were not fired. In the hours after the session ended, as the 42nd floor quietly processed what had happened, more than one person who had been in that room later admitted, privately, to people they trusted, that they had expected to be. The footage had been unambiguous. The termination list was still on the table. The logic of consequence seemed to point cleanly in one direction. Arthur didn't follow the logic. He had thought about it carefully. Not that morning, but in the weeks before, when this whole exercise had still been a plan rather than a memory. He had considered what firing 4 senior executives would accomplish, what message it would send, and whether that message was actually the one the company needed to receive. He had run the calculation the way he ran every significant calculation, slowly, from multiple directions, resistant to the seduction of the obvious answer. The obvious answer was satisfying. It was not sufficient. What he announced instead, in a room that was still too quiet to feel fully real, was 30 days. 30 days during which Richard, Gerald, Patricia, and Douglas would report not to the 42nd floor, but to the departments that kept Hargrove Industries functional in ways that never appeared in any quarterly filing. The warehouse, managed by a 30-year employee named Victor, who ran his floor with precision and calm that most executive teams would have paid significantly to learn and couldn't have accessed if they tried. The facilities team, led by a woman named Cora who had maintained the building systems through 3 ownership transitions and 2 floods and 1 electrical fire, and who knew every load-bearing wall and every temperamental circuit in the building the way some people know their own families. The janitorial staff, whose shift started at 4:30 in the morning and who had been doing so reliably, invisibly, for years. The 4 of them would work those shifts. They would answer to those supervisors. They would wear what those teams wore, arrive when those teams arrived, and leave when those teams left. At the end of 30 days, they would come back to this room, and Arthur would hear from their supervisors first. Richard began his first morning in the warehouse at 4:45 a.m. and stood for 6 hours without sitting down. By the end of the second day, his feet hurt in a way he did not have language for, because he had never stood on concrete for 6 hours before, and his body had not developed the particular tolerance for it that Victor and his team had built over years. He did not say anything about this to anyone, because there was no version of that conversation that came out well for him. Gerald was assigned to facilities, which he had assumed would be the easier posting, and discovered within his first week that he had no useful frame of reference for most of what Cora's team managed on any given day. Cora did not adjust the work to accommodate his learning curve. She showed him what needed doing and expected it to get done, and when it didn't get done correctly the first time, she showed him again without commentary. Gerald had not been corrected by someone with less institutional authority than him in 20 years. The experience was, he would later tell his wife in a conversation that lasted 3 hours and covered more ground than either of them had expected, instructive in ways he was still processing. Patricia worked alongside the janitorial team and found, within the first 3 days, that the thing she minded most was not the physical work. She was more resilient than she expected, but the invisibility, The way people moved through the building each morning without registering the team around them. The way her own name, which meant something very specific in certain rooms on the 42nd floor, meant nothing at all in the lobby at 5 a.m. when she was running a floor buffer along the marble she had walked across without looking at it for 11 years. She thought about that a great deal. Douglas spent his 30 days on the loading dock, and on the 29th day of them, he met Thomas. Thomas had worked the dock for 22 years. He was 56, broad-shouldered, methodical, the kind of man who had probably never been described as remarkable by anyone who worked above the fourth floor, and who was, in the estimation of every driver who ran that route, and every crew member who worked that shift, completely indispensable. He knew every account, every schedule, every quirk of every regular delivery, and he held that knowledge not as leverage, but simply as craft, the accumulated precision of a person who had decided a long time ago to be excellent at the thing in front of him regardless of whether anyone above him noticed. Douglas worked beside him for a shift and a half before he said anything that wasn't strictly operational. Then, on the afternoon of his last day, standing at the dock entrance while a truck backed in, he said the only thing he could think of that was honest. "Thank you for being here." Thomas looked at him, not with warmth. Exactly. They didn't know each other well enough for warmth, but with the straightforward attention of a man who is deciding whether something is genuine. He decided it was. He nodded once and went back to work. Douglas carried that gnawed back into the building when he re-entered it the following Monday as a board member. He sat differently in the chair, not visibly, not in a way anyone would notice from the outside, but he could feel it, the shift in weight, the way the chair felt less like a throne and more like a seat at a table he now had fuller knowledge of. He could not have explained this to anyone in the room, but he knew it was real. 3 of the 4 of them stayed. Arthur had offered each of them the same choice, the same morning, in the same room. Stay and carry what you learned, or go and receive a reference that would describe him honestly. He meant both options genuinely. There was no wrong answer, except the one that involved promising something you intended to discard the moment the pressure lifted. 3 of them believed they could carry it. He took them at their word. He would continue to watch. The 37 names on the termination list were removed that afternoon, quietly, through a memo from Arthur's office that cited a strategic review and a reaffirmation of the company's commitment to its long-tenure workforce. There was no press release. There were no talking points. Victor found out from his HR contact and sat with it for a long moment before calling his wife. He told her the short version. She told him to come home for dinner. He said he would. Cora printed the memo, read it twice, and put it in a folder she kept in her desk, drew alongside a letter she received in 2003 from the building's previous owner, thanking her team for their work during flood. She didn't display things, but she kept them. The rebrand was canceled. The new name, which had been 3 months from announcement, was quietly shelved. The Hargrove name stayed on the building. It stayed on the foundation. It stayed on the masthead of the company's internal newsletter, which was a small publication that most people on the executive floor had never read, and which the warehouse team, Arthur learned, passed around every month like a letter from home. He subscribed. In the weeks that followed, Arthur and Sarah moved to the company together, floor by floor, shift by shift, unhurried, not as performance, not as a media moment or a symbolic gesture stage for internal communications. Just 2 people walking to the place where the real work happened, asking questions and listening long enough to hear the full answers. They shook hands that hadn't been shaken in years. They learned names that didn't appear in any organizational chart. They sat in break rooms and on loading docks and at the edge of warehouse floors at the end of shifts, and they listened to the people who had been there the longest tell the stories that don't make it into quarterly reports. The hard years, the close calls, the moments when a whole thing could have gone another way and didn't because somebody stayed an extra shift or made a call or held a line that didn't technically belong to them. Arthur listened to all of it. He had been listening to it for 50 years, in one form or another, but he had missed. He understood now. Too many opportunities to listen in person, to be present in the spaces where the company actually lived rather than the floors where it was administered. He didn't make a speech about this. He just kept showing up. On the last Friday of the month, a small bench appeared near the entrance of the Hargrove Industries lobby. Cushioned, solid, warm to the touch. It was not large, It fit 2 people comfortably. 3, they were friendly, and it sat against a marble wall near the spot where Arthur had spent his morning on the floor. There was a brass plaque on the front, small and level and polished. That read, "Everyone who enters here matters." Amara, the receptionist who had been on duty that morning and who had been quietly living with the weight of what she'd witnessed ever since, saw it first. She stood in front of it for a long moment before she went back to her desk. She didn't say anything about it to anyone that day. But the next morning, when a delivery driver came in from the cold and stood at the entrance looking uncertain about where to wait, she pointed to the bench and told him to sit down. She brought him a cup of coffee from the staff kitchen. She asked him his name. His name was Marcus. He'd been running that route for 9 years and had never been offered a place to sit. He said thank you twice, once when she handed him the coffee and once when he left. Amara nodded both times and went back to her desk. Arthur had the bench brought up in pieces the week before because the elevator still wasn't wide enough. Some things about the building he decided he was going to leave exactly as they were, and some things he was going to change, slowly, carefully, one small true thing at a time, until the place he had built reflected, finally, the company he had meant to build all along. If this story stayed with you, share it today with someone who needs to be reminded that how we treat people, all people, in every lobby at every hour, is the truest measure of who we are. Subscribe to Echo Tales by Ken, a new story every single week, for the part of you that still believes it matters how we show up for each other.